One last thing. A shadow is following you. It's a living nightmare, breaking down reality. I have tried everything, and there is no way to fight back. You need to escape it as long as you can.
There is a force, an entity of some kind, lurking in every corner of the Amnesia universe. This being manifests as hungry flesh and an eerie red light spreading across an area and killing what stands in its way as it pursues its enemies. This being is the Shadow, the secondary antagonist of almost every Amnesia game, something the player will always have to run from and avoid. On a surface level, it just seems like some vicious and vengeful enemy, meant to close the player off from previous areas and incite tense chases. But I'd like to make a point that it's no enemy at all. The Shadow is actually the player character's guide and savior, game after game. The Shadow's purpose in the universe is to set things right, essentially. On its most basic level, it operates in the following way. Some dumbass finds an orb, these objects of unknown origin, with a multitude of vague applications. Said dumbass doesn't really know how to properly wield this artifact, unlike the ancient Mithraeus, one of the groups in the series, know to be able to use these orbs safely. The people of the other world seem to be able to use the orbs safely as well, though not to the same extent. They still struggled with the Shadow's presence. In the official Dark Descent prequel short story, With the Blessing of a King, Johann Weyer, Agrippa's apprentice, is able to take an orb safely due to his studies of these arts. Nonetheless, once someone who is uninitiated takes the orb, the Shadow begins to follow them. It plants nightmares in their mind and spreads its fleshy growth across its path. Despite its menacing nature, the Shadow doesn't directly kill its target. It just follows them, until they abandon the orb and prove in some way that they've learned their lesson. Throughout the games, especially the Dark Descent and Rebirth, it seems to follow this model. Let's start with the Dark Descent, where the series begin and where we first met our otherworldly friend. First, a loading screen quote, one which I feel sums up the Shadow's purpose very directly to the player. "Moving that orb was like pushing a star in the night sky. It wasn't supposed to happen. The Shadow isn't some vengeful spirit. It is the universe catching up with itself." The surface knowledge from any playthrough establishes this. Daniel's story began when he picked up the shattered orb in Algeria. After being trapped in the tomb with the orb, he developed his nyctophobia and was sent back to England by Professor Herbert. What pushed Daniel's fate over the edge was the 4th of July, 1839. He woke from a nightmare related to the orb and feverishly reassembled it in the dead of night. Daniel then spoke to the scholars at his university and around London, all historians and occultists. His nightmares intensified, and each man he spoke to about the orb ended up dead days later. Here we come to our first problem. Why would a benevolent being kill these men for simply speaking to Daniel? It's because they were aiding him with the orb, trying to help him use it, or rather misuse it. The Shadow doesn't target Professor Herbert, Daniel's mentor. He lives on to die another day in the other world, becoming a nice piece of environmental storytelling in Rebirth. If Daniel's sister lives, it doesn't target her, or any of his friends or family. The Shadow was warning Daniel by nightmares and not-so-subtle killing of those who Daniel used to meet his goals. Daniel didn't listen. In fact, he did worse. He made contact with Alexander of Brennenburg, an exile from the other world, and an expert in abusing the forbidden powers which the Shadow guards. Here it should be established that while the Shadow's purpose centers around the orbs, and it enters reality through the misuse of them, it does seem to care about the misuse of other supernatural powers as well, namely the extraction of vitae through torture, which Alexander does plenty of. While in Castle Brennenburg, the Shadow tears the place apart in a way it did not for the other places which Daniel passed through. It rips the castle's bricks from their foundation, floods its lower halls with blood, even tears apart Alexander's gatherer servants. As it does all this, it actually guides Daniel through the castle while he resolves to kill Alexander. On a more obvious level, it stays on his heels, forcing him to move forward rather than give up. But sometimes, when Daniel dies in-game, the Shadow advances as well, when it normally wouldn't. It's possible that death in the Dark Descent isn't entirely canonical. Much like Rebirth, after dying, Daniel awakes in a different location, even being given a helpful hint regarding what he's done wrong. It could be possible that the Shadow bails him out in some sense with each death, whispering tips into his mind just the same way that it gives him nightmares. The only times in which Daniel really dies are 3 of the 4 endings in the game, points at which Daniel irreversibly fails his task. In both the secret and the bad ending, Daniel waits around too long, allowing Alexander to escape back to the other world. So, the Shadow kills him, since he can no longer be used to stop Alexander. In Agrippa's ending, Daniel does get Alexander killed, but continues to abuse teleportation and Vitae to do so. It's only in the ending, where Daniel gets Alexander killed with his good old non-magical hands, pushing the pillars over, that the Shadow relents, killing Alexander and leaving Daniel in peace. By the Shadow's logic, Daniel has proven himself by betraying his tutor in the Forbidden Arts and leaving the place, not looking back once. Before moving on to the next games, I'm going to introduce a new concept regarding the Shadow, one which both Rebirth and the Bunker employ in their depiction of it. First, 2 memory capsules from the traitor alchemist, Kita.
Timaku's early experiments with the orbs summoned an entity, a creature, that scarred the world with its passing and wreaked utter destruction. The scar took the form of living, pulsating flesh. I have studied the orb, and I now know why the scars appear. I believe I can make use of the same perturbation to achieve our own ends. It has taken me many rises in the gaps between my work for Timaku, but finally it is done. I have a formula which is in sympathy with the pulse of the orb. I can provoke the symptoms of the red flesh, and with it will come destruction, channeled through the Vitae network. This might be the answer we seek.
The Otherworlders have the ability to essentially bait the Shadow, giving it false alarms and causing it to manifest wherever they wish. Keep that in mind. The Shadow doesn't make an appearance in Rebirth until midway through the game, though its entrance is definitely an explosive one. This is the last truly great part of the game in my opinion, right before you're trapped in monster spam corridors for 4 more hours or so. A few hours in, Tasi is teleported to Kita's lab in the Otherworld, picks up his orb, and reads about his experiments and baiting it around. Just 5 minutes of gameplay in, the Shadow bursts into the building, chasing her back to Earth as she uses the orb to escape. Unlike the case of Daniel, it doesn't stalk her around for a little while before fully showing itself. I'd say this is down to 2 factors. One, it's already in the neighborhood. Kita's already forced it through the Empress's Vitae network, and it's taken over half the Otherworld's capital city. More importantly, it sees Tasi as a greater threat than just a mere human. She's already been given the cursed water to become a harvester, so the Empress can lead her into that bargain at the end of the game. It kinda rightfully sees a ticking time bomb trying to escape back out into the world, then transform. All this is pretty cool in my opinion. There is a problem though. For some reason, the Shadow just leaves her alone once she leaves the orb in that one big portal room, unless you later go for its ending. I can't tell if this was a purposeful choice by the developers, or they just sorta forgot that the Shadow is meant to relentlessly chase you and all. About that ending though, remember Kita? Tasi can finish off his task, using his methods to draw the Shadow into the Empress's Vitae network, allowing it to finish off yet another primary antagonist of the series, and Tasi in the process, but that might be more of a mercy considering her curse. Now, even big fans of the Bunker might be wondering, where the hell is the Shadow in this game? Well, right on your nose, literally. Below the ending bridge area, where you can block off or kill the beast, if Henry falls into the bottomless pit meant to claim the beast, the following happens. Seems to be the Shadow, even if you can't see the fleshy parts. Why is it down here? Well, the Otherworlders and their Roman servants baited it down there, like Kita did. Though their reason for that is a lot less noble, maybe even a little ridiculous. You know how they do crazy shit with the Colosseum in Rome, like flooding it to have ship battles? This is the cosmic horror version of that sort of idea. They summoned it down here, so any combatants who fell would be stuck in darkness with the Shadow until it killed them, because that is still what it does if you're too close to it at the end of the day. Nonetheless, in the true ending, it's the beast that falls into the pit, not Henry. Another great evil, taken down by the shadow. Nice. A Machine for Pigs doesn't have the shadow in it. But here's why I think the shadow is in it anyways. It was made by a different game studio, the Chinese Room, and I don't think they really understood the Dark Descent's lore much. They took the basic ideas, the duality of man, weird flesh monsters, orbs, and ancient curses. Though, I'll at least give them credit that it's never explicitly said that Mandus got his visions of the future from a Mithraic orb, it's just implied. Could have gotten it from something else, I guess. But let's just say it was an orb. Here's my crackpot theory on that. The Shadow sensed a sufficient split of motivation in Mandus that it was able to create a split personality as seen in the game, the father and the engineer. I knew the father would be too weak for now, but that by the very turn of the century he would be able to resurge and set things right, tear his own machine to pieces and all. It's kinda lame, sure. I don't see why it wouldn't directly interfere. Maybe it was destroying the other world's Vitae refineries during this time, so it couldn't do much on Earth? That's all I've really got. I hope you at least consider this idea next time you play the series, and make sure to look out for what the Shadow does in the successor game to The Bunker. I certainly will. And if it guides the protagonist along in some way, maybe helps them redeem themselves and tear down the shitty place they're in, and especially if it ends up killing the main antagonist, you owe me a laudanum.